I remember that dreary afternoon when I first felt the weight of my invisibility, a sensation like an overwhelming fog settling around me. It was a day so typical of my life, cloudy and gray, the kind where the sun seemed to concede defeat before even making an appearance. I sat at the kitchen table, a place that had been the heart of our home for decades, surrounded by the remnants of breakfast, a half-empty pot of coffee, some toast left out too long, now hard and uninviting. The clock ticked relentlessly, its sound amplifying the silence that had taken hold of our house. I had always prided myself on being the anchor of our family. For over 50 years, I cultivated a nurturing environment where my children could thrive. But now, each tick of the clock echoed louder, marking not just the passage of time, but my growing insignificance. My son Darren had invited his friends over for a game of cards. I remember peeking around the corner, my heart swelling with a mix of pride and concern, hoping they would remember the values I worked to instill. Moments later, I wished I hadn't bothered. I heard laughter, a sound that once filled our home but had become a distant echo. Their voices rushed past me like the cool autumn breeze that swept through the cracked window. The warmth of the kitchen seemed to dissipate with every chuckle, every raised voice, and in that moment I realized I was nothing more than a ghost, floating silently and forgotten in the very space I had shaped. I was eager to be acknowledged, but their chatter had me pinned in place like some fragile ornament, too delicate to even be touched. "Let's play poker," one of Darren's friends suggested abruptly, and for some reason I felt the urge to make myself known. I wanted to join in, to remind them of my presence and the memories we shared around that very table. But before I could approach them, I heard Darren's dismissive laugh, the kind that carries a weight of understanding that I was no longer relevant, not in their game, not in their lives. "Nah, let's keep it fun. No offense, Mom, but it's more fun without you around," he said, and as soon as the words left his mouth, I felt my heart sink. How could it be that I, who had once been so central, so entwined in their lives, had become an afterthought? Standing there, glancing nervously from one face to another, I suddenly felt aware of my age, the very thing I had tried to conceal. I touched the wispy strands of my hair, now entirely gray, my hands beginning to tremble, not from illness but from realization. I stood frozen, my heart racing. I was a stranger in a house that had once been my sanctuary. With my breath catching in my throat, I retreated back to my chair, dropping my hands, which were now trembling more violently than before. I wrapped my arms around myself, the action both protecting and isolating me, reminding me of the increasing physical frailty that came with aging. The thought clawed at me. I had never wanted to be a burden, and yet here I was, diminished, wishing they could see me as I once was, the vibrant matriarch who could guide, support, and inspire. I wanted them to acknowledge the unpaid sacrifices I made, the sleepless nights, the moments I sacrificed for their happiness. Each one of those memories played like an old film, blurry and fading, yet etched deeply in my heart. As they continued playing, engrossed in their laughing banter, I could almost feel the walls of our once lively home tightening around me. It was suffocating. With warm tears stinging my eyes, I fought to make sense of my emotions. I had always believed that family was supposed to protect one another, that bonds were built on love and respect. And yet, here I was, invisible in the very essence of what I thought defined us. The vulnerability hit harder than I could have ever prepared for. My mind raced to the financial burdens I faced, exacerbated since my husband passed. Once, we had saved diligently for our retirement, two pairs of hands working tirelessly for a better future. But with his absence, the weight of managing bills and decisions fell squarely on my shoulders, and each month felt like a gamble I was ill-equipped to play. I had always been cautious about our spending, teaching my children the value of a dollar. I remembered how enthusiastic I felt buying their first school supplies, calculating prices, carving out mindful budgets to grant them the necessary means while also saving for the unexpected. Yet now I felt like that very caution had trapped me within the confines of our home, unable to ask for help, uncertain of whom to turn to. There was a time I could have confronted Darren, explaining how alone I felt, how the glances from the cards played translated into sharp words piercing right through my heart. But a fear gripped me. Perhaps it was the pleasant facade of family I could so easily dismantle, the knowledge of their lives being filled with responsibilities of their own, or perhaps the deep-seated sentiment that if I were to voice my discontent, I'd become not just a burden to them but someone they would avoid as I had felt today. The voices of young men filled the space furiously with youthful energy and enthusiasm. Their laughter felt increasingly distant, sounding more like a symphony trumpeting my insecurities. I wanted to remind them that I had once been young too, full of laughter and dreams. But just as with all dreams, there are pages that turn, and as quickly as I felt the warmth of memories, I was pulled back to the present where I stood behind a barrier, the barrier of age, a flicker of memory against the ruthless background of existence. But wouldn't they care? Aren't they supposed to care? I could feel the knot tighten in my chest. This wasn't just about invisibility. it turned into betrayal, leaving me wondering if perhaps all the sacrifices I made had stood for nothing. Why didn't they see me? Still, I yearned to reach out to tell anyone, how this neglect had hurt. But every time I opened my mouth to speak, the words turned cold and stiff on my lips. For a moment, I hesitated, staring at my hands as they wrung nervously together. It was then that I recalled a time when I had taken charge, a fiercely protective mother defending her nest. I had confronted obstacles with unwavering determination, always ensuring my family felt safe and secure. Yet nobody needed my guidance now, nor my strength. I felt diminished, like the fragile branches of a weeping willow swaying hopelessly in the wind. The laughter became more boisterous, filled with energy that reminded me just how precious my youth had been. I learned it wasn't just my children who slipped away. The entire fabric of my existence was tearing apart, thread by thread. The realization cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. I had built my life around family, but now they were repeating an unkind cycle of marginalization that I had not foreseen. Why didn't they understand how hard I fought to raise them, to make them the people I believed they could be, amazing individuals ready to take on the world? I wondered if any of them would stand up for me if the situations were reversed. Would they open their arms to me if I asked? And why, after so much selflessness, had I come to this point where they thought I'd no longer wish to be part of their lives? As the room grew louder and the voices blurred together, I finally couldn't hold back the weight of my emotions. I turned away without another word, not willing or able to confront my reality any longer. I excused myself into the quiet sanctuary of my bedroom, the door creaking as I pushed it closed behind me, bifurcating the echoing laughter from my heart. I made sure the latch was secure. The thick wood felt heavy as I leaned against it. In the stark quiet of the room, surrounded by familiarity, the tears I had been holding in finally flowed freely. I allowed the cascading emotions to rise up like a tidal wave, plunging deep into the depths of my vulnerability. I wished some of my resilience could beam through their layered dismissals, but standing alone at that moment, I felt the hollow absence of what used to be, a deep longing echoing within the very core of my being. I collapsed onto the bed, the softness enveloping me, cradling an ache that had become my new reality. I questioned how I could reclaim a sense of power in a world that seemed to race forward, tossing me aside like faded wallpaper. I clenched my fists tightly, my worn skin just a reminder of battles fought, and as my breath slowed to a steady rhythm, I began to comprehend the simmering strength that still resided within me. It hadn't vanished with age. It had merely been dormant, waiting for the right moment to become present again. Perhaps it was time to stop lingering in the shadows of neglect, a specter in my own home. I was more than the outdated remnants of a bygone era of motherhood. Deep inside, I felt the urge to reaffirm my presence, to unearth the resilient spirit I had cultivated over decades. I wasn't finished. I might have been forgotten today, but I would not be erased completely. My story, marked by vulnerability, deserving of recognition, could still be told. There, among the fabric of my memories and the reality of my solitude, the realization washed over me. I needed to find a way to reclaim my life, not just for myself, but as a warning, a lesson to my family that there was depth beyond mere years lived. I would take charge again, break through the isolation, and make my voice heard. This world was still mine, and I wouldn't allow myself to be dismissed again. The essence of my strength was ready to rise like a phoenix, proving that age and adversity would not define me. That day marked the beginning of my journey to reclaim myself from the invisible chains of neglect. My heart ached for connection, for acknowledgement, but I knew I would transform this pain into a purpose that could reshape the narrative surrounding my existence. I would gather my strength and remind the world just how powerful and deserving I truly was. I was ready to confront the exploitation and dismissiveness, ready to redefine the roles we played in one another's lives. Slowly rising from the bed, I wiped my tears with a firm resolve settling upon me. Anger sparked anew, bearing the flame of a dormant warrior awakening. The memory of being cast aside would evolve into my driving force, the saga of an elder eclipsed yet fierce in return. And so I stood tall, embracing the dignity that had eluded me for far too long. Seated once more at the table, I took in the sound of suburban normalcy beyond those walls. I claimed that space as my own. I would no longer be the quiet afterthought that drifted past their laughter. I would remind myself and them that I was here, I mattered, and I would no longer allow myself to be underestimated. As clear as the moments they had forgotten me, I pledged to set the ground firm for a new order, one in which wisdom would indeed strike back. My metamorphosis had begun, and with it, the dawning of a deeper, richer sense of justice, not solely for me, but echoing beyond the confines of my own existence. As long as a beat remained in my heart, I would reclaim my narrative, honor my journey, and become the architect of my own redemption story. With a steadied breath, I opened the door, ready to step back into the laughter, a laughter that would no longer pass me by unnoticed. Seated at the table once more, I would speak my truth. They would see me and they would hear me. I was not just a bystander, I would reclaim my rightful place as the voice of wisdom, dignity, and resilience. The tides were shifting, and I would be ready. How I shared my story would reflect the power I held deep within. In the end, it wasn't just about reclaiming my voice, it was about inspiring them to remember their own strength, igniting a fire that might burn brighter than any laughter. Seizing that moment would guide us all toward justice, healing, and most importantly, a life lived with purpose once more. If my story resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my living room. My hands trembled slightly as I sipped from the chipped mug, just like the rest of my belongings, showing signs of years gone by. It was quiet in the house, a stillness that felt heavy, as if the walls were absorbing my loneliness. There was a time when laughter echoed through these halls, when family gatherings meant joy rather than an impending sense of dread. It felt bizarre to think back to those days, a time when I was not simply grandma, but a person of worth in my own right, capable of love and life, not merely waiting for a call that never came. Initially, the neglect seemed so subtle, almost imperceptible. I remember the first time I noticed it. My daughter Marissa had always been the kind of child who cared deeply. She would draw me pictures and bring me flowers from the garden, yet here I was, her once beloved mother, shuffled to the side like an old piece of furniture. "I'm just busy, Mom," she would say on the phone, her voice rising with agitation when I asked her to come by. It didn't seem like neglect at first, disappointment hung in the air. But as the weeks grew into months, I realized that not only was my daughter busy, but I was becoming an afterthought, a source of annoyance rather than love. The decline progressed rapidly once my health began to falter. A bad fall one rainy afternoon led to a hospital stay, and when I returned home, I expected to find comfort in the familiar. Yet my son David seemed more annoyed than concerned. He stopped by with that artificial smile of his, the type that could mask his true feelings. It felt like the disappointment was not just in me, but the weight of my age itself. "Can't you just be cautious, Mom? You're too old to be making such foolish mistakes." His words struck like daggers, remnants of guilt mingled with the preference of youth. In those early days, I tried not to lean too heavily on my children. I had always prided myself on my independence. I baked pies for the neighbors and volunteered at the local library. But the notion of strength shifted like the wind. Little did I know that this facade of independence had made me an easy target. David and Marissa began discussing things that should be kept within a family, hushed whispers turning into pointed conversations about finances. "The medical bills are piling up. We can't keep supporting you. You need to think of downsizing, Mom." As if prepared for battle, I stood firm, refusing the insinuations cloaked in their false concern. I had my savings, a small nest egg I had built since adulating to provide for myself, to live out my golden years peacefully. But the once gentle nudge to make things easier morphed into relentless demands for my finances. "It's for your own good," they insisted, as though taking my autonomy was somehow a form of love. Their voices began to echo frequently in my mind, their words transformed into a kind of chant that justified their actions. After all, what were the elderly good for anyway? As time progressed, a cruel sense of normalcy settled over my family. The discussions turned into outright accusations. "You're hoarding money for what, Mom? Are you planning to die with it?" They questioned the validity of my needs and reduced them to trivialities. Community members began to whisper rumors, complicit in this growing neglect. The elders in my neighborhood, the ones I had always cherished, seemed to regard my plight with an unsettling mixture of pity and judgment. They stood at a distance, perhaps unsure whether to approach me or keep their heads low, feeling the heat of the shame they saw reflected in my thin frame. A particular neighbor, Mrs. Thornton, would take my hand each time I passed her a plate of cookies. "You've worked hard, dear. Don't let them take from you." Those words once felt supportive but slowly morphed into a criticism against my children, each visit a reminder of how invisibly cruel my situation had become. At the coffee shop, where I had spent countless afternoons meeting friends, voices fell silent when I entered. Laughter would abruptly halt as my presence felt like a dark cloud moving in. They did not say it, but their eyes told a story of abandonment that echoed louder than any internal scream. The world of nostalgia and ease turned unbearable, crippling in its attempts to uphold appearances. The financial exploitation unveiled itself when I started receiving calls from unfamiliar numbers. Someone at the bank had flagged unusual activity. My children had begun to withdraw from my accounts without consent, masquerading their actions as help. It was a betrayal that left me reeling. They would assure me it was temporary, a means of helping me through a tough patch. "Mom, you'll have to learn to trust us, we're only trying to manage things better." But the more they manipulated the situation, the darker my distress grew. Each transaction felt like a heist, a theft that broke my spirit even more than the physical neglect that surrounded me. Public humiliation arrived subtly, draping itself like a shroud around my shoulders. I recall the afternoon David had brought his friends home, parading them around to showcase his success. "This is my mom," he said dismissively, a hint of irritation weaving through his tone. They smiled but laughed behind my back, jesting over my feeble attempts to engage with them. "So what does she do all day?" one asked, the laughter ringing cruel and mocking. I felt gutted, exposed in the way that only family could make you feel. The intimacy crafted from years of love was weaponized against me. At one particular occasion, I dared to voice my concerns during a family dinner. "How can you take my money without asking?" I challenged them, my voice quaking. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, the air thick with impending conflict. Marissa's eyes flashed with irritation, and she leaned forward, legs crossed tightly. "Mom, you're being unreasonable. It's not like you're using it," she shot back, fury lurking underneath her carefully veiled facade. Alongside her, David chimed in, "You're just making this harder than it needs to be. We're being good children." That was the moment I finally saw them in a new light, the cruelty given permission to thrive, normalized by their sense of entitlement. They had forgotten the sacrifices I had made to ensure they had the best lives possible, endless nights spent working multiple jobs, putting their dreams before mine, and now in their eyes I was simply an inconvenience. Days turned into weeks, and the neglect morphed into calculated moves, undermining my autonomy at every opportunity. As the exploitation became more persistent, I knew I had to fight back somehow, but the shadows of doubt clouded my resolve. I began to understand that they had turned my life into their playground, a moral high ground washed over with bad intentions. Walking around town, others began to see me differently. The warmth I used to receive was replaced by cold gazes, signaling a shift that left me profoundly isolated. With every inquiry about my well-being, the disbelief seeped through the cracks. Didn't her children pull her finances together? Why does she still live in that old place? The whole community felt like a stage, filled with spectators witnessing the decline of a once respected elder, the fall of a matriarch that had once held families together. It was at this point, wedged between neglect and exposure, that I began to seek answers beyond my immediate family. I reached out to old friends, those with whom I was once close, through letters that now felt like lost relics. I shared snippets of my story, the truth of my existence stripped bare, exposing the hurt endured at the hands of those who should have cherished me most. I felt emboldened each time I sent those letters, bravery swirling within the ink. I understood I was more than a mere spectator of my plight. I held the pieces of power still buried deep within my being. Though battered and bruised by emotional upheaval, I could not let these cycles of injustice define me any longer. I would reclaim my dignity, step by step, until the walls of neglect crumbled around me, leaving behind pathways of redress for all who were silenced before me. In this dance of emotions, I connected with community organizations advocating for elder rights. The more I learned about the resources available to assist people in my situation, the more my internal flame reignited. I found allies who understood my pain without judgment, who spoke of empowerment, and for the first time I realized I was not alone. What began so very quietly in the corners of my home escalated into a profound realization of how much I had allowed their exploitation to shift my identity. I would weave together a narrative that refused to be muted, capitalizing on every ounce of wisdom and strength I possessed, crystallizing a path forward paved with the truth of my existence. I did not know how I would get there yet, but after weathering neglect and growing in the shadows of exploitation, I was destined to claim a truth that would shatter the confines of their normalization of cruelty. I would rise from the ashes of their betrayal, fueled by each drop of humiliation that polarized my resolve. In those moments of furious introspection, I began plotting my next steps toward justice. If my story has resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world slumbers and shadows weave their intricate dance across the walls of my small, unassuming home, I often find myself returning to that poignant moment, the turning point in my life journey. It's a moment suffused with the weight of betrayal, yet illuminated by the flicker of newfound strength. I was sitting in my faded armchair, a plush relic from my youth, the fabric worn soft by decades of love and memories. The cool breeze seeped through the window, carrying whispers from a neighborhood that once felt like family but had all but turned its back on me. For years, I had been the target of both subtle and overt manipulations, a pawn in a game played by those I had nurtured and loved. My children, who once danced in my arms, had woven a web thick with lies and greed, drawing me closer to the precipice of despair. I reflected on past moments, how I allowed their voices to drown out my own. "Mom, your house is too big. Why don't you sell it and move in with us? Mom, you can't handle your finances anymore. Let us manage everything for you." Each suggestion, laced with the veneer of love, hid the jagged edges of ulterior motives. I felt the sting of abandonment, a chilling realization that family can be the greatest abusers, securing their ambitions under the guise of caring. That pivotal night, everything changed. I was scrolling through a pile of forgotten papers, decades of diligently kept notes on household finances, envelopes crammed with old receipts, and dusty folders containing long-lost records. As I sifted through the clutter, something struck me. Beneath the chaos lay an order I had cultivated without conscious thought. It was then I stumbled upon a hidden compartment in my desk. In that compartment, folded neatly, were documents relating to savings I had amassed quietly over the years, a legacy I had built through prudent living, even as my kin conspired to monetize my existence. My heart raced as I realized the significance of what I held in my hands. Each piece of paper was a testament to my resilience, my unwillingness to allow dependency to diminish my spirit. Flipping through the stacks, I recognized not only bank statements, but also deeds to family properties I had held in trust for my children. It dawned on me that I had something far more potent than mere financial assets. I possessed legal leverage to confront those who sought to diminish my value. Years of scrimping and saving, often within the confines of poverty, had accrued not just monetary savings, but an acute awareness of legal nuances that could turn the tide. I thought back to long evenings spent poring over law manuals, engaging in spirited debates with my late husband on the nature of property and inheritance, discussions that had instilled in me an understanding that eluded my family. With the glow of conviction kindling within me, I devised a plan, one that would require the courage to confront my children, but within that confrontation lay the seeds of reclamation. The sun emerged the next day, casting a warm glow that mirrored my resolve. I arranged a family meeting under the pretext of discussing household matters, a ruse that concealed my actual purpose to reveal my arsenal. When we gathered around the table, I could sense their anticipation. They expected the same vulnerability I had shown in the past, the same submissiveness that had previously allowed their exploitation, but today was different. I had tapped into a reserve of power they had long overlooked. With a calm voice that belied the tempest churning inside, I unfurled the documents before them. "I have something important to share," I began, noting the flickers of confusion and disbelief crossing their faces as they absorbed the sight of faded papers that claimed ownership of properties they had long assumed would simply fall into their hands. Their eyes widened and I recognized the storm of emotions swirling, surprise, anger, and the shadow of guilt. "These belong to me, and they will remain with me as long as I am able to make my own choices," I pronounced, feeling my heart race and my voice strengthen. As I spoke, I could feel the transformation within myself. I was no longer a mere target. I was a force to be reckoned with. I recounted memories from the years when I had layered every coin away, celebrating each dollar saved with the fervor of a soldier preparing for battle. The memories surged, birds of vibrant plumage that filled my chest with hope. I spoke of the endless nights I scoured thrift stores for bargains to ensure that my family had not just food on the table, but the chance for a brighter tomorrow. I articulated my sacrifices, how I had managed to keep my family afloat while constraining my own desires, reminding them not just of the monetary value, but of the love infused within each choice I made. Their reactions were visceral. Initially disbelief shifted to resentment, then desperation. "Mom, you don't need all this," one of them spat, his voice rising in a frantic pitch, but it wasn't about need anymore. It was about autonomy, the very essence of my humanity that they had sought to diminish. I had empowered myself by acknowledging my strength, and I would not let them undermine it. With each passing moment, I found allies not only in the courage of my convictions but also in my neighbors, who had grown weary of witnessing the cruelty among my family. I reached out to a few trusted friends, those who understood the nuances of my plight. Armed with their words of support, I stood firm. A week later, I organized a community gathering at the local hall. I invited my neighbors and acquaintances to hear my story, to share my newfound voice with those who understood the struggles of aging in a world that often cast the elderly aside. I readied myself to speak about the complexities of familial love twisted by avarice. As I shared my journey, many nodded in solidarity, their faces etched with lines that mirrored the lessons I had learned. They offered me strength, standing witness to my story, reminding me that I was not alone, that wisdom does indeed strike back against the tides of injustice. The energy in the room swelled with the resonance of collective experience, unearthing hidden connections and alliances. Neighbors, once strangers, shared their own stories of manipulation and betrayal within families. Their resilience ignited a fire within me. I realized I was part of a larger tapestry of endurance. As I concluded my speech, my heart raced with clarity, and I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders as my community embraced me, ready to stand against the tides of those who would undermine others. In the days following that meeting, I decided to leverage the awareness I had garnered. I sought legal advice, putting the legal knowledge I'd accumulated over the years into action. A lawyer friend of mine agreed to assist me pro bono, touched by the gravity of my situation. Together, we strategized, preparing to challenge the very constructs that my children sought to impose upon me. With each passing day, I uncovered yet another layer of my hidden power, my network of relationships, my wisdom cultivated over years, a community willing to rise up against the misdeeds of those consumed by greed. Armed with documents in hand, I called for another family meeting, determined to confront those who had abandoned the essence of our familial bond. The day arrived, and a chilling silence enveloped the room as they filed in, brimming with resentment and confusion. I took my seat, surveying their faces, those once cherubic expressions now marred by self-imposed shadows of greed. I felt a tinge of sadness, but also a fierce resolve to take control of my own narrative. As I laid out my intentions, I could hear my heart pounding, yet clarity flowed through me like a river, each word precise and deliberate. I informed them about the legal documentation I had secured, how their attempts to control my life would no longer succeed, and revealed the truth they had sought to keep obscured. Their expressions morphed, first into anger as I recounted the moments of their betrayal, and then to the dawning realization that I had found my own footing. Behind each word, I sensed the vulnerability within them, a weakness that belied the facade of strength they had attempted to project. I concluded my address to them with one final sentiment. What you have overlooked in your desperate attempt to siphon control from my existence is this: I am so much more than the years I have lived. My journey is imbued with lessons that transcend mere age, and my power, concealed yet always present, has now manifested. The room remained enveloped in silence, and I could see their defenses begin to falter. With each passing moment, my inner strength echoed louder, reminding them of the tapestry of wisdom that I now displayed before them, in stark contrast to their facades. They would learn, through their encounters with me, that a spirit forged in resilience could not be easily broken. The revelation of my hidden power marked a new era in my life, casting aside the chains of dependency and ushering in the freedom to define my own future. I had transformed orchestrated vulnerability into a sturdy platform of unexpected might, garnering respect not through submission, but through the embrace of my true identity. In the end, it was the knowledge that I was not just a mere spectator in my life, but the author, the architect of my own fate, that sealed my liberation. I had risen not merely to confront my family, but to reclaim the dignity and strength that was my birthright. The road ahead was still daunting, but with the community at my side and the assurance of my own empowerment, I stood resolute. With wisdom gleaned from years of experience as my armor, I refused to be underestimated any longer. Sealing the door on an era of shame, I stepped forward into a future filled with light, the painful echoes of betrayal replaced by the symphony of newfound strength. Finally, I understood that the power to define my life had always resided within me, however cloaked in the shadows of doubt. Now I would rise not only for myself, but as a beacon of hope for all those who felt abandoned, proving that wisdom, patience, and spirit would always emerge victorious, no matter the odds stacked against them. If my story resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back. It's funny how life has a way of revealing what's been hidden, like the scales falling from your eyes. For so long, I accepted the life handed to me by my family as if it were a sentence rather than a choice. After years of feeling small, belittled, invisible, I finally found the ember of rebellion smoldering within. I needed to act, not just for myself, but for all of us who'd seen our strength gnawed at by the very people who should have upheld it. It was the day after my youngest son had come to check on me, or more accurately, to make sure I hadn't sold the last of my belongings to the local pawn shop. My heart sank as I observed the jagged lines of worry etched across his forehead. It played like a familiar tune in my mind, a melody of pity, control, and indifference that my family had orchestrated for years. I often heard them whispering behind closed doors, discussing my finances like I was some kind of burden. They don't realize that a burden can break, and I was far from breaking. That day, I made the first move in my game of chess against my family's well-laid plans. I picked up my phone, fingers trembling slightly, and called my attorney, Thomas, a man who held the key to my hidden power. He had been my ally in years past, helping me draft my will and navigate the labyrinth of family law. When he answered, his warm, deep voice washed over me like a soothing balm. I explained my situation, the desperate need to seize control of my life before it slipped away completely. "You have power, Mrs. Simmons," he assured me. "You just need to remind them of it." After a brief pause, I committed to a strategy that would shake the foundations of my family, upending their careful control over my life. We would prepare my affairs, my assets, properties, and even those old keepsakes that held memories I was still reluctant to part with, but I wouldn't just write them off. No, I would lay out in no uncertain terms my expectations for how I wanted to be treated, with respect, regard, and dignity. Over the next few weeks, I gathered documents, receipts, and witness statements, surprising how many people had witnessed the slow degradation of my familial relationships without me realizing it. I pieced together the story of my sacrifice, the years of caregiving for my mother before she passed, the late nights tending to my children while they threw themselves into their careers. My heart, once so heavy with pain, ignited with purpose anew. The day I signed the final documents, handing over the carefully prepared living trust and power of attorney to Thomas, was a day that marked the shift of power back into my hands. The illusion of control my family had woven around me was about to be unraveled. Trepidation coursed through me as I broke the news to them during our next family gathering, the one they relished, judging my capabilities over dishes of food that I often prepared myself. Their faces, at first blank, metamorphosed into expressions of concern, confusion, and then fear as they processed my words. "I've taken the necessary steps to ensure that I am taken care of as I deserve," I stated with an even tone. "I'm no longer leaving my life in the hands of others." It started with the once familiar undercurrent of scorn in their eyes. My daughter, whose ambitious demeanor crumbled beneath sheer shock, drew in a quick breath, unsure of how to respond. My eldest son, holding a fork full of ham midair, stared at me with the look of a wounded animal, while my youngest simply looked away, unable to mask his growing discomfort. I could feel the electric tension simmering in the air. Had I finally pushed them past the brink of their indifference? In the days that followed, I felt them tightening their grip, deploying the tactics I'd come to dread. They reached for the angles of manipulation that had been their weapons of choice for so long. They attempted guilt, hoping to pull at the threads of vulnerability I had spent so long battling to reinforce. But I was no longer that frail old woman, lost in her head, a shell of her former self. No, I was reborn into resilience, my skin thickened by the years of neglect. Through my attorney, I had let them know that I was considering evicting them from my home should they cross any lines. The biggest surprise came when my daughter showed up at my door with a sob story laced with the scent of false innocence. She began to list all the sacrifices she had made over the years, highlighting her struggles as a mother herself, in hopes of garnering some sympathy from me. When she finished, her tone dripped with feigned sweetness. "Mom, we just want to take care of you," she said, her voice laced with condescension. I smiled, a serene expression masked with a sharp intent. "If you truly cared, you would have respected my autonomy. If I'm doing this for myself, perhaps you should consider what that means for you." In that moment, I saw the realization flash in her eyes, a flicker of fear at the enormity of what I was capable of now. It hit her that I would no longer stand as a pawn in their game. Days morphed into weeks, and a new notion settled into the roots of my being. I was taking my power back, one calculated maneuver at a time. My attorney and I had devised a detailed plan for my upcoming annual family meeting, a tradition I had once cherished but now viewed with contempt. This time, however, would not merely be a gathering of grievances. It would echo with the harmony of my newfound strength. I arrived with a grand smile plastered on my face, the calm before the storm. My family, still reeling from the earlier revelations, shuffled in uncertainly. As we exchanged pleasantries, I spotted the weariness etched in their expressions. They might not have known it yet, but in their hesitation they were already losing control. As the evening wore on, I guided the conversation toward my affairs. "I want us to discuss the family trust I've put together," I began, my voice steady, rippling with conviction. Their disinterest quickly transformed into dread as I outlined the boundaries I had established. "If any of you are planning to manipulate or take advantage of me in the future, understand this. The living trust I've put in place ensures that anyone acting in bad faith will be cut off. You will not inherit anything should you unearth the grim sides of your nature." The room grew still, the air was thick with shock and disbelief. Years of dismissing my voice as trivial were suddenly shattered by the weight of my words. My son's face flushed red, his jaw clenched as if silently stifling a scream. My daughter shuffled, likely attempting to devise her next false narrative, but I soldiered on, piercing through their defenses. I have spent too long believing in the image of family you've constructed, a farce built on emotionless transactions and false pretenses. No longer. They exchanged glances filled with confusion, and I knew then that I finally had their full attention. I want to highlight something specifically, I added. I am not in a position where I'm financially crumble. You can't simply take from me when I've rebuilt myself these past months. Slowly, I allowed the weight of my words to settle, basking in the transformation that stirred within me. What had once been an impossible dream was now my very own reality, a reality cloaked in the power of justice, the aligned arrows of my effort finding their mark. The storytelling was mine now. I had stolen the narrative from them. As the conversation went deeper, I could hear them start to fumble with their words. My daughter tried a weak attempt to play the victim once more, lacing her complaints with misguided support. "Mom, I'm here for you, not against you," she uttered, barely masking the flourish of betrayal in her tone. "No, that's where you're wrong," I replied, allowing the cool edge of truth to slice through the pretense. "You've consistently ignored what I actually need in favor of what you deem appropriate. It's time I focused on my own needs. Your view of my dignity has been long lost." The silence thickened, and I saw something shift inside them, a growing understanding that they were losing their grip, their practiced tactics of manipulation crumbling before my unwavering resolve. I intended to break the cycle of control I had been caught in. I would enforce my sense of justice, the rightful place I had earned through years of servitude. In the following days, the power dynamic shifted more drastically than I had ever imagined as I began wielding the authority I'd taken back. My children were desperate to return to the fold, to re-establish themselves as caretakers of my narrative. They came up with various schemes, occasional feigned kindness, gifts disguised as peace offerings, all meant to recapture a flicker of the authority they had once wielded. Every act was laced with ulterior motives, but I saw through it all. Instead of retreating into my shell, I stood firm, drawing boundaries they dared not cross. I made it clear that every encounter would be predicated on respect, and with each interaction, I fortressed my dignity against their manipulations. It wasn't long before my vigilance transformed into a systematic approach for justice, uniquely catered to each of my family members. I gave them roles to play, but only on my terms. My daughter, forced to help me with errands, housework, volunteer work, witnessed the community I was building, gained strength from the elders who formerly were fears, and suddenly she could see the power that ebbed from friendships that held no strings. As the weeks rolled on, I watched as they fumbled with their past arrogance while trying to adapt to the new order I had created. It was thrilling, watching them squirm. They painted on smiles, forced bonds, but I could see the chaos bubbling beneath their veneer. They were no longer in control. Even as obstacles presented themselves, from financial difficulties to inquiries about my health, I wielded my singular narrative. I remained affixed to the truth that I was safe, I was secure, and I was finally untouchable. When one of my sons attempted to leverage my health anxieties into a strategy that saw him vulnerable to being my power of attorney, I didn't flinch. Instead, I embraced its absurdity. I told him, "You claim to be worried about me, yet you couldn't possibly be concerned for someone incapable of lexicon and identity." He finally saw my resolve crumbling, watched as I stood firmly in all the wisdom I had fortified across the years. Then came the day I disclosed my financial strategy to my family. Finally, my fortification reached its zenith. Months of calculated moves had led me to this moment, akin to the epic climax of a suspense novel. I gathered them all in my living room, the same room where years of silent degradation had brewed. I hope each of you brought your ears open. What I'm about to present is likely to determine the direction we traverse as a family moving forward. The tension rippled around us. I could feel the sweat tracing paths down their brows. I unveiled my plans for my estate, distributions, and future care, all designed to eliminate the potential for manipulation. Upon my passing, no assets will be passed to any of you unless you have genuinely nurtured the bond that has been rusted with neglect. Only by treating me respectfully, with the dignity I deserve, will you inherit as you intend, I reiterated with an ironclad confidence that shook the walls of that feeble, stifling air of neglect. My daughter gasped softly, and my son choked slightly as they absorbed the gravity of my proclamation. In that moment of confrontation, surrounded by wide-eyed disbelief, I realized I had orchestrated one of life's true justice stories. I let them know, plainly and simply, that I had retained a clause in my will that allowed me the discretion to withhold any inheritance if they crossed my boundaries already built upon the firm bedrock of respect, a level I had deemed acceptable. Seeing the storm of realization crash upon their faces was like watching a distant sun break through heavy clouds. It was both surreal and completely satisfying. The very force that had once threatened to consume me had been redirected, wielded, and transformed into the vessel of my retribution. Years of pent-up resentment, buried beneath the weight of familial expectation and obligation, subsumed by the glorious resplendence of justice rising like a phoenix from the ashes of passivity. Aging had the potential for so much more than simply allowing time to erode the strength of dignity. As relief washed over me, I felt the burdens lighten upon my spirit. I watched as realization dawned upon my family. They had no control left. They had lost the game not just for power, but for my life away again. Little did they know, this transformation was not simply a shifting of financial tides. It was a reclamation of my identity. Notes of power I had once reproduced into helplessness now reformed in glorious awareness. In commanding the respect owed to me, I had turned the slow erosion of my spirit around. I had uprooted the weeds of neglect that grew among the flowers of affection. After that family meeting, I began to receive phone calls, proposals disguised as olive branches from my children. I learned to enjoy the art of playing their game, recognizing when their motives were self-serving or when they genuinely sought reconciliation. On certain occasions, they even began reaching out for solutions rather than demands. A heart-striking transformation that left me feeling renewed. Little did they know, it was a facade, one that mirrored the change I had made in entering into this brave and necessary confrontation. What they failed to understand was that my strength stemmed not from punishing them, it came from no longer allowing myself to be frail. I realized that while emotional upheaval shaped them, my transformation had allowed me to emerge as someone entirely different, capable of changing the narrative in such a profound way. Justice hadn't just served as retribution, it had blurred the lines of reckoning, it had restored the ties of humanity once buried. With each passing day, the distance between us narrowed, yet the dynamics shifted into legitimacy, organizing family gatherings not around disputes but surrounding genuine affection and communal growth. I found joy in recounting familial anecdotes, retelling heartbreaking memories while offering newfound wisdom on overcoming hardship. To think that this simplicity could manifest into the movement of justice was beyond any resolution I had initially perceived. It illuminated an inherent truth. Through reclaiming control, I had ignited vigor not only for myself but for all those around me. At long last, I stood aglow in a resolution that brought closure to lives lived for others, a clarity of purpose that transformed invisibility into visibility, despair into resilience, wielding the power of respect and dignity reestablished for all involved. They knew, without uttering a word, that their days of oblivion had long passed. From that moment on, it became I who led, but softly, gently, forging bonds from ashes of neglect born anew. A clarity blessed my life, unveiled within the veil of shared relationships. The aesthetics of wisdom only matured through years of heartache. As I gripped the reins firmly of my course, I registered stirred emotions echoing through my spirit. There was much more to live for. And so the story continued, a saga born from the ashes of neglect into a hopeful future interwoven with dignity and respect, a triumphant flute carrying stories from elders across generations. When I think back, I can only smile. If my story resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes back. As I stood there in the quiet of my living room, surveying the remnants of what had been both my prison and my sanctuary for far too long, a gentle breeze whispered through the half-open window. The sun cast a warm glow on my cherished photographs, now rearranged in a tableau that reflected a newfound harmony, rather than the chaos that once reigned in their absence. Each image told a story, binding me to a past infused with love, pain, and resilience. My heart, which had so long been burdened by the weight of betrayal, now beat steadily with the rhythm of hope. Justice had not come easy. It was a disjointed journey, rife with heartbreak, yet adorned with moments of clarity. After confronting my son, something I had dreaded my entire life, the floodgates of truth opened wide. I did not just uncover the financial secrecy he had spun around us, I unveiled the depth of his selfishness and the manipulation disguised as concern. My revelations had ignited a fire, not just within me but within the community as well. Those walls of silence that had once shielded our family from scrutiny came crashing down as people began to see what lay beneath. The whispers that had passed among neighbors morphed into proclamations of support. They rallied around me, armed with the determination to challenge the fabric of deceit that had long been woven. The moment of restitution was a spectacle I could not have imagined. I had submitted my paperwork, meticulously gathered and documented, to the local authorities. With every passing day, I felt apprehension coiling in my stomach like a serpent wrapped tightly around its prey. I had become vulnerable once more, exposed, raw, and yearning for acknowledgement. Yet what transpired at the court was nothing short of transformative. Sitting there in the midst of well-dressed lawyers and witnesses, I took the stand, and in that moment I felt an unfamiliar strength surging through my veins. I recounted my story, not just the financial betrayals but the emotional toll exacted by a son whom I had trusted more than anyone in this world. When the judge issued the verdict in my favor, a wave of relief washed over me. But it wasn't just victory that I felt, it was dignity. The onlookers, my friends and neighbors, applauded softly. The connection made between my struggle and their spirits was palpable. No longer was I viewed as the frail woman needing assistance, but as a resilient presence that held the power of wisdom more potent than any form of manipulation. My dignity, once lost in the shadows of abandonment, surged forth like a phoenix reborn from ashes long thought cold. The aftermath of justice echoed through my home. My son, stripped of his position of power and validation, became a mere shadow of the person he had once been, a reflection of pity against his own choices. The financial restitution did not merely restore what was lost, it altered the dynamics of our relationship irrevocably. He could no longer walk through my front door and presume authority. Our confrontations, initially filled with venom and bitterness, grew to become dialogue steeped in the facts I presented, facts that he could not dismiss. As the weeks turned into months, I began reconnecting with my other children, the ones I had unwittingly distanced due to the emotional turmoil I had endured. They called more often, sensing the change radiating from me. They witnessed the resilience that the conflict instigated. One afternoon, my daughter, whom I hadn't seen in years, stopped by unexpectedly. With her, she carried little offerings, small flowers she had picked along the way, their scents filled with nostalgia. We sat on my porch, warmth shared between us like a blanket on a chilly night. "Mom, I heard about everything," she began hesitantly. I could see the worry etched on her face, concern for me mixed with guilt for not being present earlier. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've always taught us about standing up for what is right." Her acknowledgement, simple yet profound, filled the gaps of unspoken sorrow that had lingered between us. My heart swelled. It was in this moment that I understood the power of vulnerability. I was no longer afraid or ashamed of the struggles I had faced. Instead, I wore those experiences like medals, proof that I had navigated through darkness and emerged into the brightness of connection and truth. As more members of my family reached out, I instilled in them the importance of our bond. We began gathering weekly for dinners, a contrived start perhaps, but the laughter and conversations that ensued began to restore a sense of family that had been punctured. The warmth of their presence sunk into the very marrow of my bones, rekindling an essence of life within me that years of denial had extinguished. Even within the broader community, a shift was taking place. The stories of elder abuse and exploitation I had once felt isolated in began surfacing. I became a voice, speaking out at local events, sharing my experience and urging others to challenge the iniquities that lay hidden in their own lives. It felt as if a spark had ignited something within those who listened. Neighbors began to share their narratives of resilience, a tapestry woven from pain and strength. I took part in workshops designed to educate families about elder rights and ensuring that our voices carry weight. It wasn't easy, of course. I often met with resistance and disdain from those who were not yet ready to face the truths that threatened their comfort, but it was in those moments that my fortitude shone brightest. I stood firm, unwavering. I learned to frame my words carefully, but passionately, adapting to the waves of skepticism that washed over me. I began to see the lines of understanding drawing across the faces of others, slowly cultivating a culture of respect toward every elder. With each interaction, I felt the circle of my dignity grow wider, enveloping not just myself but also those around me. It was as if my courage invited others to shed their fears and join the march toward equitable treatment. Every time I spoke, I looked into the eyes of those seated before me, and I saw a reflection of my own liberation. As I often recalled the shadows of my past, I had moments of nostalgia that were layered with light rather than despair. I witnessed my grandchildren playing in the yard just outside. They would find revelry in the simplest of games, reminding me of the treasures of youth I had once cherished. It was an unspoken promise blossoming between us. A promise that they could grow up understanding the importance of family bonds, of standing against exploitation, and of never compromising their dignity. There were difficulties navigating my relationship with my son, but I also grew to understand that we are all subject to our circumstances. I would see him on occasion, attending family gatherings as the outsider he had made himself, yet there was something healing in the kindness I tried to offer him. At times, he would share comments on how things had changed. Lowered expectations became our new normal, not through malice but through an understanding of boundaries. My restored dignity allowed me to interact with him not out of anger, but from a space of compassion. It felt as though in the healing of myself, I had inadvertently opened a door for potential reconciliation. Life has taught me that redemption is not black and white. There is no single resolution to familial fractures, no instant fixes. Rather, it is the slow, deliberate work of humility, respect, and enduring love that gradually mends wounds.